Funding for UCSD Guestbook is provided by SAIC, the nation's largest employee-owned research and engineering company, providing information technology, systems integration, and e-solutions to commercial and government customers. And by UCSD Athena, where successful women in technology connect.
Good evening and welcome to UCSD Guestbook. I'm June Chocheles, a member of UCSD Athena and Corporate Vice President for Advanced Technology Programs at SAIC, the nation's largest employee-owned research and engineering company. Tonight it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Pat Heim, President of the Heim Group and author of several books on gender issues, communication, and leadership, including my personal favorite, Hardball for Women. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It was really exciting this morning when you spoke at Athena to discuss some of the research that you've done over the years and share with us some of your findings. I'm particularly interested in the power dead even rule, and I thought that we could start about that because that really kind of lays the framework for some of your views in this area.
Yeah. So you want me to talk a little bit about what that is?
Yes.
Well, my premise is that men grow up and live their lives in hierarchies. They know where they fit. If you're a little boy, you play games that are hierarchical. There's a coach, team captain, star players, average players, and bench warmers. But girls and then women grow up sharing power more equally. And it's what I call the power dead even rule. And when a woman behaves as if she has more power than another woman, it causes lots of grief in the relationship, even if the woman does have more power than the other woman, like is the boss. I've had women say to me about their female bosses, "Who does she think she is telling me what to do?" Well, she's the boss. She's supposed to tell you what to do. But that's how strong the power dead even rule is.
Do you have any recommendations for how women can be better prepared to deal with the power dead even rule in business? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, if you're the boss and you have female employees, it's extremely important to build relationships with them. Women grow up and live their lives in a world of relationships in a way that men don't. So relationship building among women is critical. And one of the sort of the minefields that women have to face in business is being a peer with other women and then getting promoted and becoming their boss. And often it's the women who will attack the woman who got promoted, particularly if she's going to be their boss. But if you have strong relationships with those women before the promotion, then what will happen is they're not as likely to attack and give you grief. And also in terms of keeping the power dead even, to not try to show off the things that you have and brag about whether it's your fancy car, your fancy home, or whatever, because that violates the power dead even rule. And to just play it down with women, because it'll cause you problems oftentimes if you talk about those things.
Great. The other thing that I was interested in is after reading some of your books, as I expressed before, Hardball for Women is one of my favorite. I read that probably, I read that I think about 6 years ago, and after I read it, I was like, you know what, this woman really understands the rules of the game. And I'm in a mentoring program at SAIC, and this is always required reading for the people that I mentor. I mentor both women and men. And after they read it, they say, you know, things are so much clearer. They're not maybe anticipating, you know, what the rules are. They understand the rules. And also what I like is that you talk about being adaptive in business settings. And, you know, there are certain rules, but you have to adapt to the environment that you're in. One of the things that you have talked about in your books is how about men and women learn different rules. They learn different rules and lessons, you know, regarding teamwork, regarding problem solving, and regarding leadership. So I'd appreciate if you could talk a little bit about those areas as well.
Well, with being on a team, if I were to say to virtually anybody in an organization, are you a team player? They would probably say yes, but how men and women define team player is very different. Men define it as knowing your place in the hierarchy and playing your place well without question. Women define being a team player as helping out anybody you can on this flat field in any way that you can. So what happens is, oftentimes, I'll give you an example. A common thing that I see with women executives is they get defined by their male boss as a loose cannon. And what's happening typically there is that she got promoted and she wants to really be helpful. I mean, women are really great at being helpful. And so she's out and about in the organization working in all kinds of areas, you know, cross-fertilizing, connecting people. And that's what he's perceiving as a loose cannon, because he knows she's supposed to be doing this thing and this thing only. That's why I promoted her. And he perceives this other organizational wide behavior as problematic. So it isn't an issue of which is the right way. It's an issue of that we have different expectations, but we don't know it. And that's why in writing Hardball, I wanted to give language to these different expectations, because once you have language to it, you can begin to go, oh, now I see what the problem is. You can even solve your own problems.
Right, yeah, I feel very fortunate because I work in an entrepreneurial environment, so in many respects they encourage you to be thinking about how can we, you know, cross-fertilize and basically, you know, bring different teams together, and how can we take this technology and apply it to this new problem. So I think that maybe in technology, in the technology areas, there's more of an opportunity, but I'm also seeing that in other areas as well. One of the other things that you've talked about this morning, which I think is very interesting, is what happens when you're on a team and the team loses. You know, how do you overcome that loss, and how do you move on? And it was very interesting, your discussions about how men and women are taught about loss and how to overcome loss and how to move forward.
Yeah. Well, boys are told it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. But boys don't buy that. Boys think that winning is real important. But the reality is, on average, they spend 50% of their time losing. And therefore, in childhood, boys have an opportunity to take a loss, learn from it, drop it, and move on. What happens with women when we lose, because we typically didn't, I mean, you can't lose dolls, you can't even do bad dolls. So we don't practice losing. And as a result, when we have a loss, we take it more to heart. We make it about me. We make it, you know, it must have been my fault, rather than, let me give you the research on that ties in here. A study was done, and what they did is they got a big group of men and women, arbitrarily divided them in half and gave them a thing to do. Then they gave them bogus results. They told one half of the group they did really well, they told the other half of the group they did very poorly. When they asked the men why they did really well, the men attributed it to themselves. Well, you asked me to do it, didn't you? When the women were asked why they did very well, they attributed it to effort, task ease, or luck. I tried real hard, it wasn't hard to begin with, or I got lucky. When asked why they failed, men attributed it to factors outside themselves. Well, you didn't give me enough time. When women fail, we attribute it to ourselves. Well, I must have done it wrong. So what happens is we take it so to heart, even when we don't deserve it. And it makes it much harder for us to manage it. So what I recommend to women is what I call drawing the box around it. Say it was this event at this time with this boss. Learn what I can from it and just drop it. Don't drag it around, oh, I was an idiot, I should have thought of that, you know, all those kinds of, just drop it.
Yeah, I really believe in, you know, lessons learned as well, and throughout my career, the people that I've worked with have always focused on that, and I've learned a lot. You learn a lot from your lessons, and then you apply that to solving the problem the next time it occurs, so that you don't repeat the same problems and you evolve in your career.
Yes, when I tell managers, when you have an employee that screws up, ask them what they learned from it and what they're going to do differently the next time, and that motivates them more than if you beat them about the head and shoulders.
Right, right. The other thing that I'm personally very interested in is competition and how men and women view competition. I've always been a very competitive person. I don't know whether you're born that way or you know, can learn to be competitive. I personally did not play sports as a child, but I played an instrument. I played the violin, and I was a member of the school symphony. And there's nothing like 12-year-olds competing to get the first chair of the first violin section. So that's how I learned how to be competitive through my musical career. Do you have any recommendations for how women can feel more comfortable being in a competitive environment and being competitive players?
Well, again, it's the difference, but as we grow up, boys grow up playing virtually nothing but competitive games: basketball, baseball, football, cops, robbers, cowboys, Indians, and war. But girls grow up playing typically one-on-one with their best friend, and competition there doesn't work. It will damage the relationship. So girls tend to look for win-win outcomes with their best friend. But the reality is, June, as you point out, that if we are in a business setting, we are in a competitive situation. You probably don't want the employees to compete with each other so much as you want them to compete externally. But the reality is, business is a game, and it's a competitive game. And what I recommend to women oftentimes is to see it as a game. We take it so much to heart. It's all about me. Oh, I'm going to look so bad, rather than I have to get in there, I have to compete all the way, and if I win, wonderful. If I don't win, I'm going to learn something from this. But to take it, to embrace it rather than to push it away. Because I've seen women who have done things like turn down promotions because they didn't want to compete with a friend. And that's really unfortunate. And in which case I recommend you talk with that friend and you both give it your all.
Yeah, and everything's tied together, because if you're afraid to take risks, then you're not going to go for the promotion, because that means that you might be afraid that you're going to fail, and it's all tied up. But if you kind of look at things, I think, from a segmented point of view, and you basically put partitions around it, I think that it gives you more courage to move forward and try new things.
Yeah, I think risk taking is so important. We stay stuck where we are if we don't take risks. But how many little girls have been told, you get out of that tree, you're going to hurt yourself? Rather, when the boy is up the tree and nobody even attends to it. So I think that risk take, I think it's really important. I really do. And to realize you're going to fail part of the time, and that's okay.
And that's okay. It's okay. Another thing that I've really gotten from your books is that you've said that specifically for women, doing a great job is often not enough to get recognized and to be considered for new assignments or promotions. And I'm interested in your views on self-promotion. How do you promote yourself without appearing to have this huge ego or appearing to be conceited? And I'm also interested in how women can discuss their potential. It's really hard to let people know what is your potential. Sometimes you're viewed and you're considered based on your track record, but potential is something that is really hard to measure. And I was wondering if you have views on self-promotion and
okay, so we need to remember both of those. Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of self-promotion, girls are brought up being told good girls don't brag. But the reality is, in business, if you don't talk about your successes, they're probably not going to get on anybody's radar screen. So I often talk about a relative of mine who was a very, very successful lawyer and politician. And one of the things I noticed he had the ability to do, he would be in a conversation with somebody, they'd be talking about the time of day, the weather, and within a minute he's saying, well, yes, since you asked, I was the first person on the planet to do that, and it did come way under budget, thanks for asking. And you're thinking, how did we get to this conversation? What he's very good at is gradually bringing the conversation around to his successes. And what I often recommend to women is that you find some people like that, it could be men or women, who are really graceful at doing that, and learn how they do that. Because it's almost like a dance, because women didn't grow up doing this, talking about their successes. We're really left-footed when you want to hear about my success.
Yeah, it is awkward. It's awkward, and you feel, sometimes you feel embarrassed about it.
Yes.
You don't want to be bragging, but it's not bragging. It's basically letting people know what your capabilities are and what your successes have been.
If you moved into a new house, you'd probably tell them, we just moved.
Right.
But for some reason, women have a hard time talking about their successes. So find somebody who's really good at doing this and learn to do it in the way that they do it. And the second part was promoting
promotion. Promoting yourself and letting people know what your potential is.
Right. Women tend to be promoted on their track record. Men tend to be promoted on their potential. So it's very important that you let people know what you want. I was in a company, well, it's a big company, international company, and I was talking to the person who is the head of marketing, or he was over marketing, and he said to me, because we've been doing some work there for a while, he said, "You see that woman over there? She came to me the other night." They were at a conference, and she told me that she wanted to be director of marketing. I would have never considered her, but you know, she's really good. So you have to place yourself on people's radar screens. They often wouldn't think you'd be interested in it. They just don't see you. And particularly for women who don't talk about their successes, they're just not in the pool of consideration. So you've got to talk, and then you've got to tell people what you hope to move into.
So if you want something, you have to make sure that you let people know what you want, because they're not going to be mind readers.
We think they are.
Right.
It should be so obvious that I
Right.
want to be director of marketing, and it's not.
Right.
It's just not.
Yeah, I think that's good. That encourages, this is also, I think, part of taking risks, is just basically, you know, the risk of letting people know what you want, you know, what your career goals are, what your strengths are. Everything's all packaged up into a nice little system. There's a lot of different components there.
She was taking a risk. She could have thought, he'll laugh at me when I tell him I want to be director of marketing, which he did not do. In fact, she was eventually promoted into that position, but she would not have gotten there if she didn't tell him that's what she wanted.
So you have to turn off that little voice in your head that's always kind of second guessing what you need to do next. That's right, that's right. One of the things that I know that a lot of women are interested in is how to dress for success. It's something that, you know, women are not sure, should they wear the conservative business suit, should they make a personal statement, and this is all part of the whole package. Mm-hmm. It's part of the risk-taking, it's part of the self-confidence, it's part of the promotion. Mm-hmm. Just curious about that, and basically from your research findings.
Well, first of all, how men view work dress is as the team uniform. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when you go into an organization, you see a very narrow band of what men wear. Women view dress as an expression of self, so you see a wide variety of things that women wear. One of the things I want to mention with respect to this is now we do a lot of dress down, not just dress down Fridays, but dress down every day. When some research was done where they brought people into an organization and they said, one of those two people with the khakis and the polo shirt is the manager. Which one do you think is the manager? Hands down, they chose the man. When they were both dressed in suits, it was 50-50. So there's really something that the dress down does to the perception of a woman that it doesn't do to the perception of a man. Now, having said that, one of the best strategies I find is to be able to look at the people at the top and look at how they dress, and to some degree dress similarly. The one caveat here is that the top woman often dresses in a more extreme way because she now can afford the fashion designer stuff. So don't look to her necessarily, but to other women right below her. And how do they dress? You know, and if you're going to err on the side of more formal than less formal, because it's very costly to women. And one of the things that I am just delighted has changed since I wrote this book is the research was very clear then that women wearing a suit needed to wear a skirt. Well, that has changed, and the person that I think changed it is Hillary Rodham Clinton, because she started wearing pantsuits, and then you saw it was like a domino effect across the country. Women started wearing them on a regular basis, as we are today.
That's right. Thank you. I know that that's of concern to many women that I mentor. They want to appear professional, but they also want to have, you know, some sort of, you know, personal aspect to their dress. And I know, so you have that beautiful pin on.
My husband gave me this.
And I think that that's a way that you can make a personal statement, but it's subtle. And then when you're in a meeting, you basically don't look that different, and as you said, that's the team uniform, and you appear to be a member of the team. Mm-hmm. So I think that's helpful advice for a lot of women. The other thing that I was very interested in during your talk today was the goal focus orientation versus the process focus orientation. And I know that goes back to something earlier that you said, but I'd like to address that a little bit more, because I think that there are certain people, not necessarily, all women. There's also men that think this way, but they think out the whole, process, and they're thinking about, what's going to happen next and how does all this come into play. And I think that's very important in business. But I also think that it's the goal, it's achieving the goal, it's winning, and doing so at a high quality, and doing so with good ethics and values. That's important as well. Yes. So could you address that area?
Well, the goal focus versus the process focus is not so much about winning and achieving goals. It is really how we interact differently. So when women interact with each other, I'll give you the classic example, is the man who attends the meeting that is all female, and then I'll give you the flip side. These women, they talk about one thing, then they talk about another, and and it flows, and he's trying to figure out where we're going in lockstep here, and it doesn't work that way, because women process through their ideas and their thoughts. Women process externally. So, on the flip side, men tend to hold it internal. So for instance, let's say a problem has occurred. What a man is more likely to do is to pull that problem inside, sort through his options, and say, we should do X. What a woman is more likely to do is go and interact with people about the problem and then say, we should do X. So they both get to X, but the reason the man pulls it inside is that if he were to go around and tell people, I'm really confused about how to solve this problem, would you give me some input? That would cause him to lose position on the hierarchy. So men do this internally. Women who don't live in this world of hierarchy but live in a flat world and live in a world of relationships, they get a double whammy. They can do it, and it builds the relationships with other people by going around and processing the problem with them. So they both get to the goal. They just get there in an apparently different way.
That's really interesting, and I think that I've seen some changes since we've started using a lot more technology in the workplace, and I think that email communication has really, I think, made a significant difference, in my view, for how women can communicate in the business world. I was wondering if you've had any research in that area.
There are some people who are doing research on email, but I have not found it yet. But I'll tell you, because don't get me started.
There's pros and cons. There's definitely pros and cons to email.
The thing about email, and this is true whether you are a man or a woman, pink or blue, green, is never, ever, without exception, do conflict in writing. Because once you start
that's really an important piece of advice.
I mean, how many hours have people spent zapping people back and forth, when if they had gotten out of the chair and walked over to their office and said, we got to talk about this. Mm-hmm. How many hours would that have saved us? And everybody else that we copy, because I'm trying to win and I'm going to copy broader than you are. So I think that the real thing about email is never, ever do conflict in writing. And people say, yes, but the other office is in Norway. Well, pick up the phone.
Right. Yeah, that could be actually the subject for a new book, email etiquette, in the business world.
Absolutely.
Because I think that there, as you said, there's pros and there's cons, and there's ways to, communicate more effectively in person as opposed to email.
Yes.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about was, I've heard, certain people indicate that women may, quote, talk too much at meetings. And I think that gets involved with how they process their thought process and how they process information, whereas men will internalize, and then all of a sudden they'll come out with the fabulous 5-line sentence as to what the solution is going to be. What are your views on that and your research findings for how women can, without me personally speaking too much on this topic, how women can be more effective in their communication in more of a public setting, say like a meeting?
Yes. Well, men do complain that women talk too much in those settings, and the reason is when a man is asked for his opinion, what a man is more likely to do is give you his bottom line first, and then if asked, will backfill in how he got there. What women are more likely to do is to take you through the process, their thinking process, and then give you their bottom line. Now, the reason women do this is that if a woman came up to me and said, what do you think I should do about this? And I said, do X. Then what's going to happen? She's going to think, oh, Pat thinks she knows everything. So what a woman with another woman is more likely to do is, well, I considered A and discarded it for these reasons, and considered B and discarded it for, and considered C and discarded it, and therefore I think that X would be the best thing to do. Now, I want to emphasize that is very important to do with women, because otherwise it's going to create problems, the do X. But, and I think this is what you're getting at, June, if you're doing a presentation to the high mucky mucks in your organization and you take them through the process, oftentimes you can see them phase out. The shade comes down, as I call it.
The glaze
look. This woman can't get to the bottom line. Can't get to the point. Can't make a point.
Right.
And as a result, even though you maybe had a great idea, in his brain, it gets lost. Now, if I can just talk a little bit about brain stuff.
Oh, definitely.
One of the things that may be causing this is when a man is, here's what they did in this study. They took a PET scanner, which is a machine, they put your head in it, and what shows up on the screen is the part of the screen that's red is where your brain is active, part of the screen that's blue isn't doing much, and then there's colors in between. So they put men in a PET scanner, gave them a thing to do, and what you'll see is one part of the brain is firing away like crazy working on that thing. Put women in the PET scanner, give them the same thing to do, and it looks like a pinball machine. It's firing all over the place. So she talks as she thinks, and he talks as he thinks. But because we think differently, he's listening to this woman do a presentation now, and he's trying to grab onto this.
And she's all over the map.
She's all over the map.
Talking about relationships and what's related to what. And
absolutely. And I thought about doing it this way, and then I decided it wasn't such a good idea, and then I considered that way, and he's going, where are we going with this? So when you're communicating with the other gender, oftentimes if you can figure out how to communicate more effectively, and that is in the way that works for them, then you're going to be more successful in your communication.
I think that's really helpful advice. As we finish up, I'd like to ask you what your top hardball play for women is. Do you have a top, either kind of a top play that women can think about as we close this?
Well, I think maybe one of the most important things is managing how you were perceived in terms of power. You brought up dress, that's part of it. Part of it is facial expression. The most powerful facial expression for both men and women is the straight face, not the smile. Noticing if you're nervous, not wringing your hands, scratching yourself. Noticing how you come across in terms of power. Holding your body open rather than shut and closed. That, I think, will get you further down the road than any single other strategy.
Well, thank you, Pat. This has just been really great, and really appreciate all your insights. And it's very exciting for me to meet you after all these years.
Thanks.
And I wish you a lot of continued success.
Thank you.
In your career. My guest has been Pat Heim, management consultant and author of Hardball for Women, among other books. Thank you for joining us on UCSD Guestbook. I'm June Chocheles. Good night.